Hi, this is Brian with Prophetless Medium Post, and today we're going to talk about removing tracking markers from your shot. I've had a lot of requests for this lately and thought I would do a video on a couple different techniques on how you might approach this depending on your situation. One of the things I would note, we're going to take a look at this shot right here where we have these kinds of tracking markers. I just wanted to point out that if you have any control over the production, you may not want to use these kinds of tracking markers because they really cause more problems than they solve. If you don't have anything cross in front of it, it's not a big deal what you put on there for tracking markers. But in this example here, we have a hand that goes right through it. And it just makes more work for you in the end when if you take just a little bit of time in production, you can save yourself a big headache. So I just want to quickly point out that you may want to look into using tracking markers like this, where it's just like an offset green, or even like this, which is also another pattern that you could use. With an offset green. The reason you would do this is because chances are you can use one key and key out both of these green colors at the same time because they're pretty close, but you're still going to be able to track that very easily. The trackers will easily pick this up. What you don't want to do is something like this, where you have these red markers, especially for something like a phone, which is probably going to be held by someone because the red will be in the skin color. That'll make problems, especially if you have like a finger cross in front of the red. You're going to have all kinds of problems trying to take that red out. There's something to think about if you have control over the production. Go back down here and let's take a look at this. There's a few different ways to go about this. If you don't have reflections and you don't have anything pass in front of it, this is pretty straightforward. All you need to do is add a mask to the garbage mat of your key and you should be good. So let's take a look at that first. Before we get into the key is, of course, we need to track. So let's add a planar tracker and we'll bring this in. And if we take a look at the planar tracker, before we do this, let me just show you in this shot, you have a finger that comes across like this, and it doesn't really go past the halfway point. Because we can use the planar tracker, we're just going to track the top of the phone. So, you know, something like that, and that should probably work. We are on frame 0, so our reference time is correct. I'm going to try the hybrid point, and let's just track it forward. This should be pretty quick, which it is. Yeah, it looks like a pretty good track. Okay, good. Let's keep that off to the side. And then now let's add in a keyer. You can use any keyer you want. I just like the Delta keyer. That's a pretty good keyer. And let's do a quick key. So I'm just going to grab the background. I'm not going to get too crazy about the key. This is all about taking care of these tracking markers. For the tracking markers, all we need to do now is just add a mask and mask out where those tracking markers are. Let me go to frame 0 and use the animation from our planar tracker to match the movement of the phone. So let's do that. In the planar tracker, let's create a planar transform. That'll be our animation for the mask. We're on frame 0, so we have a couple options. In this case, if we didn't have reflection or something passing in front of it, we could just grab a polygon and make one mask around the whole entire thing to get rid of the tracking markers, which is absolutely valid, especially if nothing passes in front of it. But we're going to take a look at just getting rid of the markers themselves. So to do that, we could just use ellipses like this and, you know, make them about the size of the markers and have this go into the garbage mat and have them removed. So we would take the ellipse, drop it into the input of the planar transform. So now it's going to have the animation, as you can see. And then we're going to take the planar transform, holding down option, let go. On the Delta keyer, we want garbage mat or the more gray color input. And now if we look at the Delta keyer, you can see our marker is gone for our entire shot because the tracking is good. So now to get rid of the other 4, all we need to do is add 4 more ellipses. So we could probably just copy that, paste, 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 paste. 4 more copies, and we can select each one and move it into place. There you go. Again, if nothing passes in front of it, great. This is all done and you don't have to worry about it. You can put whatever insert you want in there for. Now, this is one method. Of course, we have to deal with if the hand comes in front. So what could we do here is we could add a mask and subtract it from our garbage mat. And this is one method that we could use. So what are we going to do about this? So what we need is a mask to bring back the area in here. over here, what I did was I made a magic mask. Now I just did this quick, because I want to show you the process. And then I used the mat control to just kind of bring down the edges a little bit. And so what we want to do is let's take our whole entire ellipses and all that kind of stuff. And you can use whatever you want. I'm going to use the mat control, but you could use a bitmap or whatever you want. We're going to take our mats, drop it into here. And then we're going to take our mask, this mask here, and bring it into the foreground of the mat control. And let's take a look at the mat control. So if we look at the mat control right now, you can see we have our dots and everything is working out great, right? So in the mat control, what we want to do is we want to combine the alphas, and we don't want it to copy. We don't want to copy the foreground alpha onto the background. What we want is to subtract the foreground from the background. If we do that, now you'll see as we get up here, it's subtracting from the alpha here, okay? And if we put that into the garbage mat, now let's take a look. Now you can see that it's the hand is going through. Of course, you have to refine this edge, but now our markers are gone and the hand is back in. And you're going to have some issues to deal with, like right in here, but that's something to do with the mat. You do a nice clean mat for the hands and your markers will be gone, and then you'll be able to replace the screen very easily. So that's one approach to getting rid of the markers, by using the garbage mat. Another approach is to paint out the markers before it goes to the key. And there's reasons for doing this. It depends on your situation. It's up to you. Whatever method you think is the best approach. Well, you could use a paint if you want. You could use a paint and clone it. You could just use paint strokes and then use the planar transform to use clones. And that's a possibility. We'll talk about that next. What we'll do here is we already have these masks, right? Why don't we just take a background, okay? And in that background, let's select the color, green. And we're going to take all of our masks in the planar transform and drop it into the background. And if we take a look at the background, now we have these colored dots here that we can replace on top of the markers. And if I grab a merge, and we take our background, drop it in there, and there's no reason to be this crowded. There we go, make a lot more space. Now if we take a look at that, you can see we have our markers on there. We have a problem here though, because we have these paint going across, okay? Maybe we can take this alpha and use it in the mask, and in the merge, or we can do it in the mat control. We can invert the mask, okay? And then if we pull a key, we're getting pretty much the same result as we did using the mask right into the garbage mat. So this is another way that you could approach it. Okay, I'm going to turn that off. And let's talk about using the paint stroke. So there's a couple different options here. I'm just going to drop this planar transform into the foreground, and let's use a paint, and we'll drop the paint into the input of the planar transform. Now, if we look at the paint, we need something to go into the background. So the way to approach this is let's use a background. We'll drop it into the paint, and let's look through the merge. Right now, the background is pure black. Now, we want to be able to use this background just for the resolution, but we don't want it to add anything. We only want the paint strokes. So we can just turn the alpha all the way down. And if I take a look at the paint now every one of the paint strokes is going to have an alpha to it. Okay, and now let's take a look at the merge. So there's a few different ways we could approach this. We could go to the stroke because we want it to be on all frames. We could just paint using the color if we wanted to. So I could go here and select the color, so it's the same color, and just come in here and paint all this, right? And paint these out. So this is just like what we just did. We did the background, okay? When we did the background, this is like almost exactly the same method, where we're picking a color green and then we're just painting out the tracking markers. If we take a look at the paint, you can see that it's just the paint strokes, which is awesome. We don't have to do any other masking after the fact. It's already got the paint strokes have their alpha. And then you can see we have our animation already done because we have our transform. And so it should match along with here. And again, we can grab our mask here to mask out the hand. Sorry, let me just make a little bit more room here. Okay, and so the same thing applies, and then you have your delta key here, and you're sort of getting the same result. Let's undo that mask again, and let's go back to the merge, and we'll go to the beginning. So that's one way you could do it. You could just paint just like we use the background. Another option is to be able to clone from a still frame. Reset that. We can go to the media in, And the only reason I'm showing you these different methods is because it depends on what you need to do. You know, every shot has its own issues and problems, so it's good to know a bunch of different ways. So anyway, let's go back to the paint, and this time we have it on stroke. We're going to go to clone, and in this case, we're on frame 0. Let's grab our media in and drop it into the source tool. So if we're going to use the media in, we could use a still source. And then we can just pick a frame that we want, and we can use the still frame so we're grabbing colors straight from the frame itself. And command, I'll bring that brush up, and then we can just come in here and go like this. I'm just going to do a couple because I think you get the idea. And then again, because we're painting on a transparent background, you've got your alpha already done. We have our transform so that it has the animation, and then it's going over the top, and everything looks great, right? So that's another way to do it. So the last way I want to talk about doing this is using the stabilized plate. So in this example, there's probably no reason to really use a stabilized plate. It's kind of overkill for what you need to do in this shot. But the reason I want to show this one is because if you have tracking markers on, say, something like cement or a wall that you need to remove, and you're not doing any kind of keying operation, if it's just a cleanup or object removal, this method right here, and I've talked about this in other videos, is a great way to approach it. And that would just be stabilizing our original plate and then using that stabilized version to paint out the markers. We'd go to the Planar Tracker, and then we want to change the operation mode from track to steady. And we can see what the steady time is. It's on frame 0. So we'll do all our paint on 0. And because we already have the planar transform here, it's going to match through. So if we take a look at the steadied version, you can see now we have a steady version of the plate based upon frame 0. And then we're going to use this steady version for our cleanup. And let's look through the merge. And in the paint, what we want is we want the stroke. We want it to be on clone. And over here on the source tool, we just want to grab our stabilized plate, which is Planar Tracker 1. The one thing I do want to point out is that as we go through the shot, we have this hand come up. And so if let's go back to the stabilized plate. If we take a look at the stabilized plate, okay, we can paint, we can clone, and we can clone from anywhere on the phone, right? But we're working with a stabilized plate, which this hand is coming through. So we want to make sure that our clones aren't anywhere where that hand goes through. So that means that we really just want to use this top corner for our paint work, okay? So that we don't have the little piece of the hand come in, okay? Just want to point that out. Okay, so let's go back to the merge, look at our paint, and we should be good. Command, and so I really just want to use this corner right here. Okay, once I'm done, you can see we have our paint strokes, right? And then that's based upon our stabilized plate, and then you can see they track through. And so it'll be the exact same situation. We go to the merge. You can see we have our points. And then of course we have to replace the hand back in, so we can use our same magic mask and bring it into the effects mask. And there we go. And then take a look at the key. Of course, we need to spend some time refining that matte. Might be a good idea to not just use a magic mask, but to actually do the roto shape yourself. This is yet another way that you could approach cleaning up tracking markers. So that's just a handful of common ways to deal with removing tracking markers. But if you have any problems or issues, let me know in the comments. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.